Lewis Hamilton rolled out of the pit lane at Spa with absolutely nothing to lose and everything to prove. Starting dead last after one of his most humiliating weekends in a Ferrari, the seven-time world champion was about to send a message that would leave his own team speechless and trigger emergency meetings at Maranello. What happened next wasn't just a comeback drive, it was a declaration of war that has Ferrari executives scrambling and the entire paddock talking. Because while everyone was focused on the FIA's controversial rain delays and Max Verstappen's fury over ruined wet racing, Hamilton was quietly orchestrating something far more explosive behind the scenes. This is the untold story of how one drive exposed Ferrari's deepest problems and why Hamilton's message has everyone from Toto Wolff to Christian Horner's replacement watching nervously. The weekend had started as a complete disaster that would make even Ferrari's most loyal fans question everything. Ferrari had fitted what sources describe as an untested component to Hamilton's car, a revised suspension floor interaction system that hadn't been properly validated through their usual correlation process. Hamilton was screaming over the radio in free practice that something was fundamentally wrong. The car had unpredictable mid-corner snaps that would send him sideways without warning, zero grip on corner entry that made every turn a gamble, and no predictability on throttle application that left him guessing every time he tried to accelerate. But here's where this story gets absolutely insane. Ferrari had been ignoring their seven-time world champion's feedback for weeks, maybe even months. The same suspension component that destroyed Hamilton's weekend? Charles Leclerc had been running it successfully since Montreal, perfecting it through multiple race weekends, while Hamilton was left in the dark. Think about that for a second. Ferrari gave their star signing, the man they're paying astronomical figures to deliver championships, a component in Belgium that his teammate had been developing and refining since Canada. And then they wondered why Hamilton couldn't make it work on his first weekend with it.
The qualifying disaster was just the beginning of what would become Ferrari's worst nightmare. Hamilton was eliminated in Q1, one of his worst Saturdays in a Ferrari, a team that had promised him championship-winning machinery. According to paddock sources, the team had made critical decisions without what insiders call full correlation between data and driver feel. They weren't listening to the man they're paying millions to win championships, the driver with more experience than anyone else on the current grid. The rear lockup that sent Hamilton spinning at the bus-stop chicane wasn't driver error. It was a mechanical failure that Anthony Davidson, former F1 driver turned pundit, immediately identified as a gearbox issue. The sound of the rear axle locking under braking was unmistakable to anyone who understood F1 machinery. Then came the ultimate humiliation, a forced pit lane start. Hamilton would begin the Belgian Grand Prix from the very back of the grid in a car that was actively fighting his every input, while his teammate started from a comfortable position further up the field. But what Ferrari didn't realise was that they had just lit a fuse that would explode in their faces 24 hours later, creating ripple effects that are still being felt throughout the paddock.
Meanwhile, the FIA was creating its own controversy that would overshadow Hamilton's struggles until his comeback began. Max Verstappen, the four-time world champion who thrives in wet conditions, was absolutely furious with race control's decision to delay the start for over an hour. "The start procedure being suspended is a bit silly," Verstappen said, his frustration evident. "You should just run a few laps. They're way too cautious now. The heavy rain is coming and then it's going to be a 3-hour delay." But Verstappen's anger went deeper than just the delay. Red Bull had specifically set up his car for wet conditions with high downforce, sacrificing straight-line speed for grip in the corners. When the race finally started and quickly dried out, Verstappen found himself at a massive disadvantage, his car optimized for conditions that never materialized. This wasn't just about one race, it was about the FIA's increasingly cautious approach to wet weather racing that's killing the spectacle fans love. Lewis Hamilton, despite his own problems, agreed with Verstappen's assessment, saying the conditions were definitely manageable for a standing start. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. Two of F1's greatest champions, usually rivals, were united in their criticism of race control while dealing with their own team's strategic disasters.
Overnight, something extraordinary happened at Ferrari that went far beyond normal race weekend adjustments. The team made extensive changes that sources describe as the most comprehensive car rebuild they'd attempted between qualifying and race day all season. They removed that problematic untested component that had been causing the rear instability, ride height was completely readjusted
adjusted to optimize the car's aerodynamic platform. Rear damping was softened to give Hamilton the predictable handling he'd been demanding. The aero map was completely altered to improve stability on corner entry, addressing the specific issues Hamilton had identified in practice. But here's what the cameras didn't show and what Ferrari tried to keep quiet. Hamilton had spent hours in heated discussions with Ferrari's engineers, essentially giving them a masterclass in what the car needed to be competitive. This wasn't just a driver complaining about his machinery. This was a 7-time world champion, someone who's won races with McLaren, Mercedes and now Ferrari, explaining exactly what was wrong and how to fix it. Sources suggest this wasn't just about fixing the setup for one race. This was Hamilton asserting his authority within the team and demanding the respect his experience and track record deserves. The car was finally giving Hamilton what he'd been asking for all along. Not perfection, because no F1 car is perfect, but trust. The ability to push without fear of unpredictable behaviour that could send him into the barriers.
From the very first lap, Hamilton began what can only be described as a systematic assault on the midfield that reminded everyone why he's considered one of the greatest drivers in F1 history. Car after car fell victim to Hamilton's precision, but this wasn't aggressive in the reckless sense that we sometimes see from frustrated drivers. He was calculated, methodical, as if each move had been rehearsed in his head during those long hours of overnight preparation. Through Eau Rouge and the Kemmel Straight, he found the inside line time and again, using every inch of track width to maximise his opportunities. Through Blanchimont, one of F1's most challenging high-speed corners, he carried speed where others hesitated, his confidence in the car's handling finally restored. Coming out of the bus stop chicane, his exits were clean, tidy and controlled, a stark contrast to the wild slides and lockups we'd seen in qualifying. But here's the part that gave everyone in the Ferrari garage chills. The team's radio remained unusually quiet. No tactical overreach, no aggressive strategy calls, no micromanagement from the pit wall. It was as if the team didn't quite know how to respond, because while they had made the changes that unlocked the car's potential, it was Hamilton who was delivering a performance far beyond their most optimistic expectations. By lap 20, Hamilton was already fighting for points, while other drivers in similar machinery were falling apart around him. Carlos Sainz in the other Ferrari-powered car was penalised for weaving under pressure. Lance Stroll was making messy defensive moves that showed his desperation. Yuki Tsunoda was clashing wheels with other drivers as the midfield battle intensified. Meanwhile, Hamilton's racecraft was being described by commentators as a masterclass in wheel-to-wheel combat. Every overtake was perfectly timed, every defensive move calculated to perfection. When Hamilton eventually climbed into 7th place, something shifted in the Ferrari garage that observers noticed immediately. Ferrari engineers began offering split times, updates on cars ahead, gap information, a hint of optimism creeping into their voices, but still restrained, still cautious. There were no celebrations, no congratulatory messages over the radio, just quiet disbelief at what they were witnessing. Let that sink in for a moment. Hamilton had just delivered one of the drives of the season, climbing from dead last to the points in a car that had been fundamentally broken just 24 hours earlier, and his own team was speechless. They knew they were watching something special, but they also knew they were partly responsible for nearly preventing it from happening. The real consequences of this drive go much deeper than the points scored or the positions gained. Hamilton's post-race interviews were masterfully crafted, calm and respectful on the surface, but loaded with subtext that anyone familiar with F1 politics could decode immediately. He thanked the team for making the necessary changes, acknowledged that the car felt far more drivable than it had all weekend, but beneath that diplomatic exterior you could feel the underlying message burning through every carefully chosen word. This wasn't about joy or celebration, this was about showing Ferrari and everyone else in the paddock what could have been possible if his concerns had been addressed earlier, if his feedback had been taken seriously from the beginning. The timing here is absolutely crucial and cannot be overlooked. We're deep into the 2025 season, past the halfway point, and this result has reignited deeper questions within Ferrari's technical department that sources say are causing serious internal discussions. Why did it take a qualifying crisis and public embarrassment to trust Hamilton's judgment? Why were critical decisions being made without proper correlation between data and driver feel? And most importantly, how many more weekends will it take for Ferrari to give Hamilton a car that truly works consistently? Sources close to the team suggest Hamilton's performance has triggered conversations within Ferrari that could reshape their entire approach to car development and driver feedback integration.
But the story gets even more interesting when you consider the broader context of what's happening in F1 right now. While Hamilton was proving his point at Ferrari, Red Bull was dealing with their own internal revolution. Christian Horner, the man who built Red Bull into a championship-winning team, was nowhere to be seen, replaced by Laurent Mekies in what sources describe as a power struggle with the Austrian parent company. The timing of Hamilton's message couldn't have been more perfect. While Red Bull was in transition and Mercedes was struggling with their own car development issues, Hamilton was showing that experience and feedback still matter more than raw speed or political manoeuvring. Max Verstappen's frustration with the FIA's rain delay decision had exposed another crack in F1's foundation, the sport's increasing reluctance to embrace the challenging conditions that separate great drivers from good ones. Hamilton's drive proved that when given proper machinery, the sport's legends can still deliver magic that no amount of data analysis or simulation can replicate.
What really happened at Spa was Hamilton taking one of the most broken weekends of the season and turning it into a declaration that has reverberations throughout the entire paddock. The evidence points to something Ferrari is only just beginning to understand, something that could change their entire approach to the remaining races and beyond. When Hamilton gets a car that doesn't fight him, even partially, even for just one race weekend, he's still absolutely lethal. This wasn't just damage limitation or making the best of a bad situation. This was Hamilton proving a point that has team principals, engineers and drivers throughout the grid talking in hushed tones. The fan reaction tells the complete story of what transpired. Hamilton was voted Driver of the Day by a massive margin, with social media platforms lighting up as his progress through the field became impossible to ignore. Racing forums exploded with analysis of his overtaking moves. Even rival team supporters were acknowledging the masterclass they'd witnessed. But this comeback didn't win the race, didn't put him on the podium, didn't add significant points to his championship tally, yet it accomplished something arguably more important for both Hamilton and Ferrari. It reminded everyone in the paddock, from team owners to junior drivers, that Lewis Hamilton is not here to fade quietly into retirement or accept mediocrity from his machinery. The question that's now consuming Ferrari's technical meetings and strategy sessions is simple but profound. What happens when they finally give Hamilton the car he deserves consistently? Because if this comeback drive is anything to go by, if this glimpse of what's possible when everything clicks is any indication, then the best performances from Hamilton this season might still be yet to come. The conversations this single drive has triggered within Ferrari could determine not just the remainder of 2025, but the entire direction of their 2026 car development program. And that's a message that has everyone from Maranello to Milton Keynes paying very close attention indeed.